take a minute just to introduce Joan Hall and again, tell her a huge thank you. But so Joan has had an interest in animals her entire life. She was an elementary school teacher and a remedial reading teacher in an earlier life, perhaps just earlier in this life. And then she's really been able to join her love of animals and children together and became an instructor at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden. And it was here that she really got to see some of the impact of animals on children and vulnerable people in particular. And so she became certified as a human animal intervention specialist through Oakland University. And then she's initiated the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden, their groundbreaking program, the Human Animal Intervention Program. This provides HAI work for incarcerated teens and at-risk preschoolers and middle school students with autism. So we are delighted that she is willing to take the time and talk with us today. So with that, I'm going to turn things over, Joan, and let you take off.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kogan, and thanks to all of you for inviting me to share some time with you today. I'm so excited to share with you all of the different things that we've learned with the help of our exotic animal partners through the Cincinnati Zoo. And I want to get to it right away because sometimes I have a tendency to get too enthusiastic and spend more time than I have. So let's just get to it right away today. First of all, I want to give you some objectives or things that we're going to work towards during our time together. So there are 3 of them. During our exploration, we want to identify and name 3 ways that non-traditional animals or exotics can successfully contribute during HAI interventions. We also want to recognize and describe the progressive components of our successful unconventional human-animal intervention sessions. And then we want to learn ways to recognize and measure human-animal intervention benefits within certain vulnerable populations. So to do that, we really need to clarify for just our particular discussion, what's the meaning of the term exotic animal? If you look, there are lots of different ways to describe this set of animals, but one simple way is to say they would be any non-domesticated species of a mammal, a bird, a reptile, or an amphibian. But to clarify just a little bit more for our discussion today, we would say that they are non-native animals to any specific region. They're a non-traditional companion animal, and they could be for some people, but they are definitely not a dog, a cat, or a horse. Sometimes it's easy to define animals as to what they are not. So the pictures of the animals that you see here are definitely not HAI partners, and they should never be considered as such. As ethical behavior demands, these animals should never have contact with humans unless all of those markers noted here at the top are strictly followed, which really means never outside of regulated, lawful, and highly professional care. So that means they would never be asked to partner in any HAI endeavor. So what animals do we ask at the Cincinnati Zoo to partner with us? These animals that we're going to see pictures of here in a minute have participated in the past or are now participating in the Cincinnati Zoo human-animal intervention programs. And I have to say that each one of them has a documented history of consistency, reliability, and predictability during contact with lots of diverse populations and in lots of different places. All of them are either directly handled by the HAI participants or they engage in adaptive play, which means they can walk on protective spaces on the floor, they can have their particular toys added to spaces. So that's basically the type of contact they would have. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at some of them. Needles is a lesser hedgehog tenrec, and if she did not live with us at the zoo, she would be native to Madagascar, and she would be found in dry forests She's an insectivore, and she's mainly nocturnal. She would communicate by smell. As you can see, she's got a really long snout. But when she's nervous or really threatened, she rolls up into a tiny little ball. And her hair, I don't know if you've ever felt hedgehog hair. It's kind of that. It's kind of prickly. Next gorgeous snake is Prism, the Brazilian rainbow boa. She would be native to South American forests. She's semi-arboreal. She can climb up into trees, and she can use her tail, it's somewhat prehensile, to hang on to low hanging branches. She does that a lot during our animal intervention sessions. She likes to curl her tail around participants' fingers and around their wrists. So she likes to give snake bracelets a lot to some of our participants. Sienna, the little spotted turtle, she's an aquatic turtle, and we bring her little travel swimming pool with us to our HAI sites. She's an omnivore, which means she eats lots of different plants and sometimes insects, and she would be native to the Great Lakes or to the eastern coast of the United States. And here's Quartz. She's a sand boa. She, along with the Brazilian rainbow boa, they are non-venomous, but that means she's a constrictor and she does eat meat. She's native to the deserts of North Africa. And here's Rose. She's a screaming, hairy armadillo. That's a mouthful. But she's native to South America. And this picture doesn't really show her little toes, but she's got huge claws that she uses to dig in soft earth because she's an insectivore. She eats insects, grubs. So she would live in South America, maybe on the edge of forests or even on farmlands. But she has that hard coating on the top. It's kind of like a hard shell, but we would call those hard platings. We would call those her scutes. And then here's Marvin. He's one of the oldest animals that we asked to participate with us. And for the younger preschoolers that I work with, we always call him Grandpa Marvin because he's a little intimidating when you first see him. He's native to Australia, and he does have a blue tongue. That's just the tip of the blue-tongued skink's tongue that you're seeing in this photo. It's really about as wide as his whole head. And he flicks his tongue out to smell, to know where he's at, because he uses his tongue as we use our noses. But he also sticks his tongue out when he's really nervous to flash that blue color, so that would intimidate any predators that might try to bother him. If he would get really nervous, which thankfully he's never done with us, he can lose his own tail, but he can regenerate a new tail. Here's Leonardo. He's an eastern box turtle. You might be familiar with eastern box turtles depending on what part of the country you live in. He was a rescue, and he, I think, is about 10 to 15 years old. He's an omnivore too. He eats plants, insects. And here's Tank, our Florida box turtle. She would be native to the state of Florida, and she's 60 years old. But she would eat the same kind of diet that Leonardo would eat. And then this is Crystal. She is a ball python. She, again, is a constrictor. She's non-venomous, and she would be native to the grasslands of Africa, the savannas of Africa. And she is a go-getter. When it's time for her to leave her house, she is up out of her enclosure, and sometimes within her carrier there are naturally air holes inside of her carrier, and she has been known to flick her tongue through those air holes to see where she is and what's going to happen next. So she's really enthusiastic about meeting other people. And for all of these animals, having worked with them for a number of years now, I can say that each of these animals has a distinct personality, and I really do truly think they're champions who contribute really uniquely to our HAI endeavors. So now that you've met these animals, let's turn our attention to our first population that we try to serve through HAI programming. These would be the teens who are incarcerated in a juvenile detention center. If you're not familiar with the juvenile justice system, here are some of the markers that help us identify them. And they'll help us get a clearer understandings of the teens who can benefit and also contribute to the HAI endeavors that we try to offer to them. We would say that most of them are between the ages of 16 to 18, but I have seen teens in the detention center as young as 9 years old. They have been adjudicated in the juvenile justice system, so that means they've dealt with a court. They're convicted of a delinquent offense that if it was committed by an adult, it would be considered a crime. Or they could just need protection from abuse or neglect, or they may have a dependency issue. And of course, all of these teens who are incarcerated can be served by traditional HAI programming, but as you'll see, non-traditional HAI offers them some very, very unique benefits. So these are just generally identified needs, and of course, they're really generalized, but just as a focal point, we could say that these youths tend to externalize difficult experience into difficult behavior. So they sometimes show lack of sense of a higher purpose. There's social toxicity, emotional insensitivity, impulsivity. I can see that happen a lot with the teens that I work with. They don't always use connective thinking when trying to make or to come to decisions. Sometimes there's a sense of meaninglessness, and it's sometimes difficult for them to see another's perspective. So as you know, through all human-animal intervention endeavors, safety for all the participants is really, really important for the human and for the animals. So at the Cincinnati Zoo, we try to provide safety and health for the animals and for the people. So we use these principled cornerstones that should be met for any exotic animal who's contributing to and participating in any HAI experience. We adhere to the Federal Animal Welfare Act of 1966, and that's enforced by the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. And it will allow for the health and safety of the exotic animal partners to make sure that that's overseen. So these cornerstones take their ethical effectiveness from following these USDA regulations. So we always make sure that public health and safety is of high importance. And the animals that we ask to participate with us are ethically obtained. They're captive bred, which means they've either been born at a USDA regulated institution or they've been procured from another institution that follows USDA protocol. And again, as I mentioned, we adhere to the Animal Welfare Act. These animals are healthy and they're veterinarian followed, and they have health records readily available for anyone who cares to see them. They're followed through their entire lifespan at the zoo. We follow strict handling protocols that go back to all of the regulations that the USDA and Animal Welfare Act ask of us. They're professionally maintained, and they're ethically transported to any HAI site according to USDA regulations. So that means we're very careful about temperature, light, safety while traveling, safety within buildings where they're going, because for exotics, that's very, very important, especially the temperature regulation and light sensitivity. So when we're following these USD regulations, we're primarily concerned with the biological needs of our animal partners. But for exotic animal welfare, we follow the 5 freedoms. You probably are familiar with these. So we just want to spend a little time so you can just refresh your understanding of them. There are 5 of them, and you can take a look at those now. Also, besides the 5 freedoms, we closely abide to the opportunities to thrive that you see listed here. Through following these guidelines, we are striving to achieve the stability of homeostasis homeostasis in our animal's partner, their internal world. So for the first three, we're concerned for the animals staying placed in a healthy position. So their physiological needs are met. They can have variability in light and in temperature, and they can experience a variety of position. They are not always asked to sit in the same position at all times. They have the freedom of movement within safety limits. Then the next three are concerned with healthy animal behavior. We let them express species-specific behavior with frequency and diversity. All of the animal partners have choice and control, and we encourage the behavior for their species that is meaningful for them. So all of these opportunities to thrive try to work towards animal homeostasis, which is the maintenance of stability in their internal environment. And then one way that we strive to do this ethically is that we have a documented history of reliability, predictability, and consistency with these animals in diverse populations. So once we've met the challenges of the cornerstones of exotic animal participation and animal welfare, how do we maintain those ethical practices? We consider trust, the reciprocal confidence between handler and animal, really paramount in any kind of engagement that we have with animals and even our day-to-day interactions with them. And really the formation of reciprocal trust between exotic animals and partners does not really vary from the trust that must form between any animal and their human HAI partner. Especially with exotic animals, we have to be keenly aware of proxemics. We have to consider the intimate zone, especially if the animal is a prey animal. So the two mammals that you saw on the screen, needles and rose, are both considered prey animals. So we have to be very careful when we enter their intimate zone to make sure that they don't feel threatened or they don't feel like their lives are in danger. And to the best of our ability, we have to try to determine that the animal does not consider HAI as compliant work. We have to create moment-to-moment assessment, which is really meticulous, but it still has to be flexible, and we have to have reality-based evaluations. And then with exotics, we need to make sure that each animal has support in their individuality. We try not to interfere with an animal's natural inclinations. We definitely need to be the animal's advocate at all times. We have to permit authenticity of animal responses. That goes a long way when we're trying to set up safety protocols, but we have to make sure that the animals can respond with authenticity. We have to be a Jane Goodall. I'm sure you are aware of who Jane Goodall. She was the fantastic field biologist who studied chimpanzees meticulously. So we have to be that way with our animal partner, and we do not want to misinterpret signs of disinterest, or we don't want to misinterpret signs of personal territory expression. And this is very, very important. We do not want to remake an animal into something he or she is not. And sometimes that's difficult to do when you're working with exotics because people have preconceived notions about what an exotic animal should or should not do. So we have to try to really make sure that we're not making them into something they are not, or we're not asking to do something that they cannot do. So when you look at all of these trust builders, do you really see any of them that would not also fit in traditional HAI animal needs? I think they're pretty universal. So let's consider now the benefits that can be realized for teens who are troubled. There's a lot of them here. So I'll try to just group them together. Animals can serve as an emotional bridge, and they can improve self-esteem and self-efficacy. They can help elicit good knowledge of individual animal behavior because they have subtle, when people are in their presence, there needs to be subtle cue reading. This is where I think exotics excel because their behavior is so nuanced and so very, very different than traditional animals. People who are in their presence do really have to read their behavior, and sometimes their behavior is very small and very minute, so it really calls for high attention. And then they can foster empathy and nurturance and certainly enhance task concentration. Sometimes the animals can help create safe space boundaries for troubled teens. They can help regulate impulsive and disruptive behavior. This is again where exotic animals can excel because their responses are slow and they're measured. And that's what's required from the human participants too. Their responses and their activities need to be slow and measured. They can help teens take on a new role as a healthy decision maker and help them develop pro-social behaviors. This is another place where exotic animals can offer so many unique benefits because there is a high interest for exotic animals because they're just so unique. And it also requires the teens to become a decision maker when they're working with an exotic animal. Should they ask the animal to engage in behavior? Should they wait until the animal gives consent? It's really, really important that the teens now see themselves as someone who can make healthy decisions for themselves and for another. It can help the youth become trusting and civil, and it can help them soften hierarchies because the animals truly, even though they're exotic animals, they are dependent on the teens, and they do need to work towards developing a healthy, responsive authority. This is something we highlight every time the teens are working with the animals, that they need to have responsible authority with the animals. And animals who are working in HAI can offer these benefits only through immersive and accessible contact. So those are just generalized troubled teen benefit. So if we look very carefully at teens who are within the juvenile detention center or in the juvenile justice system, we can see some unique benefits. HAI can offer healthy autonomy. They can positively change the atmosphere within a prison or a detention center. They can foster social sensitivity, especially in that atmosphere, which can be so guarded and so suspicious. It can aid in forming a change in self-worth and outlook towards others. It can lessen prison staff. They enjoy the animals too. Sometimes they want to visit with the animals before our sessions or after their sessions. And because they're exotics, they have a high interest in meeting with them. And they can beneficially impact the treatment already offered. The services that I provide for the teens certainly in no way supplants or takes therapy away from other services provided for the teens. It's just as an adjunct or a support for treatment that's already offered. It can prompt residents to participate in healthy conversations about animals. I've personally witnessed this, that sometimes the correction officers or the COs will peek their head in the door and the teens will invite them in. They'll ask the COs to come in and ask them if they would like to see the teens handling the animals. They talk about the animals with them. And then after the sessions are over, the COs will come to me and they'll say, resident number, whatever, talk to me for a long time last evening about the animals that you had here yesterday. So it promotes healthy conversation between student and student, between the students and myself, and then also with the staff. The last one is very important for the Cincinnati Zoo because truly the residents are serving the community because they're positively interacting with the animals and they're giving them enrichment. And any contact with people, because these animals spend a lot of time with people, can be very beneficial for other areas that the animals will visit or will work in. So they truly are affording a positive impact on the community by working with these animals. So the reptile partners can offer distinctive HAI contributions, and they're listed here. They're highly captivating for very young males. It doesn't take them too long to get interested in reptiles. And from my previous experience with the teens during our traditional classroom visits, it was really obvious that even if other animals participated in those environmental education programs, reptiles in most cases held the teens' riveted attention. Sometimes I try to wonder why that's so. But to me, as a person who works with these animals, I just think they're so amazing myself. But there might be other reasons why teens feel this way. Their nuanced behavior is less intrusive for those who have personal space concerns. And sometimes within a prison situation or a detention center situation, there are personal space concerns. So these animals are not so enthusiastic about entering into other people's spaces. They have to almost be asked to enter into that space. And that, I think the teens find that less intrusive. They are learning about and handling reptiles, which give them a high sense of accomplishment and self-efficacy. And then reptiles sometimes self-select people, and they have self-selecting responses to people, and that promotes handler responsibility and healthy autonomy. Animals, especially exotic animals, will merit attention, and they can elicit consideration of their wild relatives. So I think because of these unique contributions, reptiles or exotic animals seem to fill a particular niche for this population. And I wonder, and maybe you're wondering this too, if there are other vulnerable populations that may find these particular contributions so beneficial. And could other types of animal partners also make in-kind contributions? So how do the teens contribute to the HAI partnership? And as you know, to meet the requirement of competent and ethical HAI, animal partners also have to experience benefit. So let's take a look at some of these. Certainly, as we talked about before, exotics need to have a change in location and position, and so they get to travel to the HAI sites. They get to leave the Cincinnati Zoo and ride in a car and go to the detention center. So that's a change in location and position. And then there's ethical variance in light, sound, smell, and that encourages explorative behavior. And again, we go back to ethical. They're very carefully transported. We have to be very careful within the detention center itself to make sure the temperature is just right and the light is right. And we do our best to mitigate any sound that might be disturbing to them. This is very important, an alternative human touch, because most of the zoo handlers and caregivers are young adult females. So for most of the handlers at the detention center, although we have had some females, they're all male. So it's very good for our animals to have a different touch and a different set of hands working with them. Then the stability of a formed trust relationship with the handlers. This is so important because it's another chance for the exotic animals to trust another human. Because their life is spent a lot with humans, forming trust relationships with humans is very enriching, and it helps them achieve that homeostasis that we've talked about. So there's a secure framework for distinctive explorations with animal choice making, and there's always the application of animal common currency. So we do have a framework, a very strict handling protocols, And within that framework, we're looking for safety and a chance for the animals to explore safely. So to dive a little deeper into what animal enrichment can mean for our exotic animal partners, here are the benefits for animals who do participate in enriching activities. The enriching activities can favor hippocampal and synaptic plasticity. Common currency is in play. They're balancing conflicting demands. Animals will always avoid bad and favor good. So finding cost benefit in each situation is enriching. We also know that reptiles can engage in rapid and subtle evaluative processing. So very enriching for them. Animals must have links to sensory and perceptual cues that are coincident with successful behaviors within challenging contexts. Engagement elicit new learning or memory of previous learning. So conversely, behavioral outcomes of lack of enrichment means a deprivation of new experiences. Animals can become unable to cope, and that failure can create chronic stress. In other words, the animals cannot learn how to develop resilience. No to little chance to perform specific behaviorally needed activity can lead to animal withdrawal. Animals will choose what is most pleasant, but deprivation of reaching desired behavioral goals will provoke negative emotions. So at this point in our discussion, we need to start looking at more exact information about the team participants and our methodology. So the teens who had exposure during the human-animal interventions were adjudicated incarcerated teen males, and they were somewhere between the ages of 13 and 18. They were residing in a local juvenile detention center, and they were divided into two groups. They were Group A and Group B, and they were in the same detention center during the same dates and times, and we had 3 separate modules over an 8-month time frame. All of them had complete anonymity and parental permission to participate. The juvenile detention center staff managed and adhered to the legal protocols that lastly reached the judge who presides over the juvenile court. And here I need to note that because the Cincinnati Zoo had been providing very successful typical classroom animal visits for almost a decade, the judge felt comfortable with this new venture. And I mention this because, as you know, building trust with your potential clients when beginning any HAI program is really essential. Let's take a look now at the types of animal contact each group had. Group A was our control group, and they had one 45-minute classroom lesson with 3 Cincinnati Zoo interpretive animals, and most of the time there was one reptile or more than one reptile, depending on how much the teens had asked for the reptile during the previous visit. Participants could only touch the interpretive animal while an instructor was holding them, and they had explorative discussions of animal adaptations and their ecological contributions. Group B was our HAI group, and their experiences were adjunct to other services offered to them by the detention center. They had 6 45-minute interpretive reptile handling sessions when 4 interpretive reptiles were present. They studied participating reptiles' natural histories and our zoo handling procedures. Their contact was immersive, accessible, and successive. They actually learned how to handle the animals. They learned about stress and calm reptile behavior. And they ethically and empathetically handled Cincinnati Zoo interpreted reptiles according to our protocols. In both contact types, the teens' behavioral expectations were set and motivation to meet those standards was present through modeling acceptable behavior around animals around each other. But for the Group B handlers, those components were highly intentional, explicit, and monitored because of that immersive contact with the animals. Self-behavior monitoring and control were a high priority. The teens filled out handling self-evaluations after each session, and they focused on animal need and welfare, and the teens' responsibility for that welfare was first and foremost. The handling teens filled out evaluations on their handled animals also after each session. Group support of individual teen handlers and ethical processes were encouraged and reinforced, and the teens understood that they could remove themselves from these experiences at any time. Teens reflecting on their experiences seemed to be really important to see if there was any HAI benefits, that maybe even a glimpse into HAI benefits. So we were striving for understanding and truthfulness from the teens to see possible benefits. We wanted to see what could show us an indication of benefits. And to support ethical practices listed here are the benchmarks for initiating an important component of our HAI program. So we asked all the participants in Group A and Group B to complete reflection sheets about their experience. The reflection sheets were examined and rated by two independent raters. One was a zoo staff member that did not attend the sessions, and the other was a detention center staff member who was a behavioral therapist. The teens were fully aware that their reflection sheets would be read only by the detention center staff person and one of the zoo staff persons to evaluate only the effectiveness of the HAI program. They were aware that the evaluation of their reflection sheets did not affect their personal progress in relation to their incarceration. So here's a representation of the reflectivity sheets that each participant in Group A and Group B filled out. And then remember, we wanted to see if there was a difference in reflections between the classroom teens, Group A, and the reptile handlers, Group B, using a social science measurement. So you can see underneath each head, heart, hand section, the prompt questions that the students were encouraged to try to answer. Group A, the classroom, filled out one sheet immediately after their one classroom experience. The reptile handlers in Group B filled out reflection sheets after handling session 1, session 3, and session 6. And when I compared the reflectivity sheets, I only used session 6 reflection sheet to the classroom. We did not examine the reflection sheet entries until all the sessions were complete. Remember that the measurement of reflectivity needed to be genuine and legitimate for this particular group, which I found very hard to do, because if I gave them traditional, what do you think, how do you feel, yes or no, I didn't really feel like they would take that constructively, and maybe we couldn't get their genuine or legitimate answers. So I decided to on a tried social science measurement, and I needed to try to concentrate on just one beginning stage glimpse into possible change. So our reflectivity measurement was based on a study of student nurse reflective journaling during their round of clinical experiences. The student nurses' entries were rated according to Mesereau's level of reflectivity. And Mesereau is a sociologist who is considered the founder of transformational learning. As you see in all of these different levels, beginning at level 1 and ascending to level 7, there's increased depth and perception of experience at each level. So let's take a few minutes for you to take a look at these and see how each level of reflectivity increases in perceptiveness. Remember our raters that we discussed. They would read through each sheet, each head, heart, hand entry, and rated each section according to these Mesereau ratings. Each teen in each model got a composite rating. Here is a simple graphic of how we interpreted our data. The raters J1 and J2, those were one person from the zoo and one person from the detention center. They rate in total the reflectivity for each teen. They were averaged, and then each teen in Group A and Group B now has an average reflectivity rating. Those were combined in their specific group and averaged. And then now we have an average for Group A and we have an average for Group B. So a little more detailed background, we did not read the journals until after all the HAI sessions were completed. The reinforcement of healthy social behavior came from the animals themselves and from handler cohort collaboration during handling sessions. So that means we did not write encouragement or comments in the journals. The teens never really saw their ratings. They passed their journals on to us at the conclusion of the classroom and the HAI sessions, which they had agreed to before we even began our sessions. They knew that they would not see the journals again, as the journals were used to only evaluate the HAI program. So what did we discover about the reflectivity levels of both teams? To find out if there was a statistically significant difference between Group A and Group B's reflectivity, I ran an independent mean sample t-test. And the results showed that there is a significant statistical difference between the two groups. As you can see, Group B handlers had a significantly higher reflectivity rating than Group A. I also wanted to discover if individual teen handlers grew in their singular reflectivity. I found some interesting occurrences. As you can see, there were some dips and some spikes. Can you imagine why? I think it's useful for us to see these variances and responses for this population's reflectivity, because different occurrences in their day would show variances, and maybe those could be reflected here. Could a dip on the final entry reflect sorrow at the end of the HAI sessions? I ran a dependent means or a paired sample t-test and again found a statistically significant difference in reflectivity between the handler's first HAI session and their last HAI session. We were able to glimpse into their individual growth and reflectivity, and overall, we can see growth and reflectivity for all handling teams. And then remember, we determined that the reflectivity rating was just an indication or a glimpse into positive emotional and social benefit. If we go deeper into what the teen handlers share, I think some of the phrases and the emotions that you're going to see here in a moment show most insightful perspective and introspection. These are some of the individual expressions which they wrote in their reflection sheets. Sarah is a zoo care staff person. She is a keeper. The quantity speaks not only to the perceptive expressions, but also to the intensity of sharing what was so very meaningful for them. There's a richness expressed here that our statistics cannot capture. I feel so privileged to have witnessed what occurred between animals and teens, and to me, this is the heart and inspiration of HAI. Let's transition now to our second group utilizing HAI. We can investigate the group of middle school students with autism from a community school dedicated to encouraging all their students to realize, grow, and contribute their unique gifts and talents to the community at large. Here's a graphic that portrays the possible benefits of HAI for youth who have autism spectrum disorder. They can possibly benefit in a growth of social skills, social engagement, affiliation, and collective efficacy. And again, exotics can help them become active contributor of unique talents and gifts for community service. They can also have a different sight, different type of handling, different voices, different smells that can help enrich our animals' lives. And it encourages the participants in ongoing social conversations. For inclusivity or inclusion, self-advocacy, and self-determination, the students can learn to know when and how to ask for help. There's an anxiolytic effect to animals, which can be very calming. And I think most of our participants found that this was particularly true of snakes. There's flexible stability, and they contribute to animals' enrichment and welfare. In the cognitive domain, there's an encouragement of sensory integration. We can enlist the theory of mind, the why of another, and then they could also learn natural histories and handling protocol, but we adapted them to individual needs. And then again, because these animals were exotic, animals merit attention. This is an illustration of how we proceeded in our methodology of these students. First, the school staff assessed the students to find those who did not have a high fear of animals and who felt that they could benefit from being a member in a small cohort that would work together towards similar goals like social skill development, growing personal understanding of animals, and learning the natural history of reptiles. The students also filled out a self-interest assessment to determine their level of comfort being so close to animals. Their experiences were adjunct again to already provided school therapies. They had 6 HAI sessions 2 times a week, and their time frame was 45 minutes to 1 hour. We followed most of the same methods as the detention center. They did follow Cincinnati Zoo handling protocol, and they did have reptile natural history studied, but those were all adapted, much less paperwork. And then when it was individually appropriate, they were given independence in holding the reptiles or in handling. Sometimes they needed lots of help, and they did not have overabundance of independence, but we tried to do it to fit each individual student. They did evaluate themselves as handlers, and they did evaluate the animals that they handled, but it was in a suitable adaptive form. The only difference that we did within this program is we sent home for the family animal biographies to help the parents emphasize the individual animals and to personalize them. We asked the students to fill out a degree of happiness survey before their HAI, and that was their self-interest assessment that I mentioned before, and post-HAI or after their sessions. The questions asked them how they felt about being so close to the animals and how satisfied they were with their immersive animal contact. The ratings went from 0 to 2, with the lowest rating being a 0, which was the frowning face, to the highest, which was a 2, which was a happy face. Totaling the questions ratings could add up to the highest rating of 8. So participant 1 and participant 2 knew they were going to be happy, and they remained happy. Participant 3 and 4 grew in their assessment and how they perceived their endeavors would be and how they actually were. And participant 5 was pretty confident in what she felt. We also asked individual teachers of the students to choose and rate positive change in particular behavior in which they felt the students needed to experience growth. And mostly those were social behaviors and self-control. The rating form was developed by the teachers themselves using the rating of 0 to 1, which meant little to no change, and 3 showing the biggest change. The teachers rated the students before HAI and after HAI, and the ratings were done outside of the HAI sessions when students were not in the presence of animals. My next goal would be for the students and animals to be rated when they're in the presence of each other, perhaps maybe a coding type situation, but we had a lot of difficulty with staff ability to attend the sessions. But we did see growth for 3 out of the 5 students. And I think maintenance of social skills within this population during challenging experiences is important too. Next, I want to share some of the individual student expressions that were written on their post-HAI degree of happiness survey sheets. Like the teen's self-reflective writing, I think these written expressions revealed the individuality and sincerity of their impressions and thoughts about themselves, the animals, and their HAI sessions. Let's move to the next group of students who participated in HAI sessions, and they were preschoolers enrolled in a Head Start program, and they were considered within the Head Start program to be struggling. Here are the possible benefits of immersive contact with animals, and as you can see when we go through these, there's going to be an overlap or a shared benefit with the other groups that we've been exploring. The exotics excel in the closeness to animals that require calm, sustained behavior. Animals in classrooms present or promote an I can experience to help aid in succeeding in a school setting. And exotic animals can excel in close physical contacts with animals that help develop individual proxemics and promote safe space boundaries. For inclusion, they can promote small muscle development, and again promote self-sufficiency and personal agency, and they encourage a sense of normalcy. They invite social participation with others, which is a catalyst for inclusivity. In the cognitive domain, again, there's a wealth of sensory stimulation and sensory integration. And for the last 3, I think the exotics excel here too. There are captivating differences in animal behavior that really require sustained mental attention. Immersive contact with these animals enrich the current behavior that the students have, but that also introduces a whole new realm of animal-centric vocabulary. And animals stimulate student-to-animal conversation and student-to-adult conversational interaction. The methodology we used with this group's HAI is depicted here. It was similar. When assessing students for the cohort inclusion, low and no fear of animals and the ability to participate in group formation activities was really important. We spent a long time very slowly introducing these animals to the preschoolers. And then, as with all of our other groups, this HAI experience was adjunct to other therapies and services already provided to these students. and they could choose not to participate at any time. Groups were small, maybe 2 to 3 students, sometimes only 1, and the HAI sessions were much shorter, 15 to 20 minutes. They also had 6 sessions over a 2-week time frame. The sessions were very loosely based on play therapist. I'm not a therapist, but we did have some touching and co-holding of turtles. Snakes sat on some laps. Grandpa Marvin, the blue-tongued skink, sat on some laps. We also had animals on the floor in a safe space, and we had zoo-safe animal toys that were utilized, and we placed animals, needed items close to the animals to use in the play space. They helped cover and secure the animal crates, and towards the end of our sessions, they were reading books to the animals, they were drawing and showing favorite pictures to them. Sometimes they showed them their favorite outfit that they were wearing, but we were always mindful of slow, quiet, purposely kind behavior near the animals and how to determine if the animals were happy or not. Again, we were asking them to simply evaluate animal behavior. We asked, why were they happy? What did you do to help them feel safe? So that was self-evaluative in nature. To determine efficacy, the teacher chose her Head Start curriculum benchmarks and identified the benchmarks with the social component. The rating scale that she used ascended from 2 to 8, and she rated with a baseline rating, which was pre-HAI, and a post-HAI rating for each benchmark for each student. We totaled all the student ratings within Group 1 and all the students within Group 2 and looked for growth from baseline rating to post. And these were done in the presence of animals. And in this set, we only had 2 groups because there were so many absences in our other groups. I considered those absences to make the ratings inaccurate. So we only checked 2 of the groups. So our first one was regulate emotions and behaviors and establish and sustain positive relationships, participate cooperatively and constructively, listen to and understand increasingly complex language, and use expanded expressive words to use appropriate conversation. So I ran a dependent or a paired sample t-test for 2 dependent means, and we did calculate from the preschool's baseline rating to their post rating that there is a statistically significant difference between those 2 ratings. For the preschoolers, I tried to come up with a very simplified degree of happiness survey, but found that the students had much difficulty with page symbol orientation, crossing the bridge from real-time experiential feelings to constructed symbol representation. So I considered those surveys invalid. Again, perhaps coding behavior done by another person would be beneficial, but could also have an effect on child comfortability and authenticity of responses. So during the HAI sessions, I relied on my observance on the willingness to participate and enthusiasm of response to get a glimpse into the HAI benefits. But I also relied on the teachers' evaluative responses in the presence of animals and some out of presence. So some of the outcomes observed were perseverance, following direction, and respecting the needs and rights of others. A great opportunity for students to practice self-control and empathy. This was interesting. This evaluative response felt like perseverance was one of the benefits. She mentioned a student that was definitely not confident in the situation, but through gentle supports and encouragement, she was eventually able to share and select a toy. And then this evaluative comment talks about self-correcting behavior that a student initiated. Besides all of the HAI benefits that we've explored today, there might be another surprising benefit that could be distinctive to exotic animal participation. Some conservationists who are interested in psychosocial components of the growth in conservation ethic formation have theorized about how those ethics really begin, are nurtured, grown, and have formed. So looking at those conservation ethicists, because of HAI benefits, we're going to be able to see an upward progression of newly formed skills to the emergent formation of conservation ethics based on the current thinking of conservationists. These formations are seen and expressed differently in each HAI group, as we've discussed, but I think they're all there. HAI immersive contact with exotic animals allow the participants to see, feel, and understand animals. Perspective taking or self-introspection, whatever form, allow participants to stop and add mindfulness to their experiences in really highly individualistic ways. Empathy and nurturance was fostered for another, both animal and fellow cohort members. And because of this emphasis on animal needs and for calm and expression of behavior, students were exposed to socially competent behaviors. They experienced self-efficacy and healthy responsive autonomy. They formed sensitivity and healthy social boundaries. And they increased in the management of impulsivity, and those are all socially competent behaviors. They enjoyed healthy exposure to exotic animals in personal sphere environmentalism within their own personal experience. They developed competent, responsible, and ethical animal interactions. And because they were working with others for animals' benefit, they began to have emerging conservation ethics. Exotic animals now merit high consideration and they have importance. So that concludes my presentation. I thank you so much for your thoughtful attention. And then I suppose we'll open up for questions or comments.
Great. Thank you so much, Joan. I really appreciate you taking the time today